a fleeting connection. Nelson couldn't shake the image of her, the way she moved with quiet strength, the way she'd run from him that day on the trail. Even after a full day of meetings and pretending he had it all together, her startled eyes lingered in his mind. The next evening, he found himself in the library, clutching a box of books he'd grabbed as an excuse. As he stepped inside, the scent of old paper and wood enveloped him. There she was, bent over a table, arranging books with effortless grace. She looked up, her gaze meeting his briefly. Recognition flickered in her eyes, her smile cautious but kind. "Can I help you?" Nelson cleared his throat, words tangling. I have books to donate." He extended the box, his palms clammy. Steph stepped forward, her fingers brushing his as she took it. The brief touch sent a jolt through him, unexpected and raw. She didn't seem to notice, turning instead to log the donation. Awkwardly, he blurted, "Do you like reading?" Her lips twitched with amusement. "I work in a library. What do you think?" Heat rose to his face, and he laughed nervously. "Fair point. That was a dumb question." "No," she said softly. "Just honest." For a moment, the world shrank to just them. Her steady gaze, the warmth in her voice, it felt like an invitation. But then, reality crept back. She turned to her task, and the fragile bubble between them burst. "Thanks for taking them," he murmured. "It's my job," she replied with a small, genuine smile. Nelson lingered, memorizing the curve of her lips, the calm in her presence. Then, with a heavy heart, he turned and left. Behind him, Steph let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Over the next few weeks, Nelson made frequent visits to the library, sometimes buying snacks from the cafe where Steph worked part-time. She began to notice his subtle kindness, how he always left a generous tip or how he'd ask about her day. What Nelson didn't realize was that Steph had started looking forward to his visits. Despite his wealth and stature, he was endearingly shy and awkward, like a child trying to navigate a world too big for him. But she told herself not to read too much into it. Men like him don't notice women like me. One evening, Nelson gathered his courage. "Steph, would you like to have coffee sometime? With me?" Steph blinked in surprise. Her cheeks flushed. I'd like that." Part 4. Transformation Together. As their coffee dates turned into long walks and late-night calls, Steph discovered Nelson's insecurities about his weight and appearance. "I'm tired of people seeing me as just the rich fat guy," he confessed one evening. Steph squeezed his hand. "Then let's change that. Together." From then on, their bond grew deeper. Steph designed a workout routine for Nelson, waking early to jog with him. She introduced him to her simple, healthy meals, teasing him gently when he complained about missing fast food. Months passed, and Nelson's transformation was astonishing, not just physically, but emotionally. He carried himself with more confidence, though his affection for Steph never wavered. Bridging hearts and families. When Nelson introduced Steph to his parents, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. His mother's sharp gaze swept over Steph, and her disapproval was immediate. "She's a waitress, Nelson," his mother said, her voice low but pointed. "She has no family, no connections, no standing." Nelson's jaw tightened. "She's also the woman I love. And if you can't accept her, then you'll lose me." Steph blinked back tears, her heart caught between gratitude and fear. She'd spent her whole life standing alone, never had anyone defended her like this. His mother's lips pursed in a tight line. "Fine," she said with a clipped tone, "but don't expect me to pretend this is normal." Steph felt her chest tighten, but she squared her shoulders, determined to prove herself. Over time, it was her warmth, her wit, and the quiet strength that Nelson had fallen in love with that began to thaw his mother's icy demeanor. Steph's laugh filled the house in ways no one else's had, and her natural charm had even Nelson's father chuckling by the end of dinner. What finally broke the ice, though, was when Steph caught Nelson's mother in the middle of a disastrous attempt to bake. "Mrs. Grayson," Steph teased gently, holding up a tray of misshapen cookies, "you're supposed to cook the batter, not wage war on it." For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then Nelson's mother did something no one expected. She laughed. From then on, they were inseparable. His mother, once so aloof, began calling Steph for everything from garden advice to wardrobe tips. Steph became the daughter she never had, and their bond grew so strong it surprised even Nelson. By the time the wedding rolled around, the transformation was complete. Steph stood at the edge of the aisle, her heart racing. She glanced at Nelson, who waited for her with a grin that could light up the world. As she walked down the aisle, Nelson leaned toward her and whispered, "Remember when I scared you off that first day?" She smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through her as she recalled that day. In that moment, all her insecurities faded away, replaced by the love surrounding her in this new family. Steph's lips quirked. "Yes. And you've been awkwardly adorable ever since." Nelson chuckled, but when he glanced at his mother, his smile softened. She was wiping her eyes, dabbing furiously with a handkerchief. Steph faltered, her own tears threatening to spill. For someone who had grown up without a family, this moment felt impossibly big. When the vows were exchanged, Nelson's mother surprised everyone by standing up. "I wasn't sure about you at first, Steph," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But you've shown me what true grace looks like. I've always wanted a daughter, and now I have one." The room fell silent, and then a wave of applause erupted. Steph's tears finally spilled over, and she hugged her mother-in-law tightly, whispering, "Thank you for everything." Nelson grinned, pulling Steph into his arms. "See? Even my mother loves you now. You really are a miracle worker." Steph laughed through her tears. "And to think, I almost ran the first time we met." "Lucky for me," Nelson said with a wink, "you didn't run far." Their guests roared with laughter, and as Nelson kissed his bride, Steph knew she'd not only gained a husband but the family she'd always dreamed of. Always believe you can do that which you put your mind into. The end.